Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, and during the games I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And today we have a Caro Kann Defense against G. Mian Mercado from, is that the Czech Republic? No, it's the Philippines. I think it's got a tiny bit of yellow on it. I can't really make it out because it's too small. But my opponent plays the knight c3 variation of the Caro Kann. And I like two different systems here. One of them is taking on e4, and after knight takes, not playing the traditional bishop to f5, but instead going for knight to f6, known as the Tartakower. The other is g6, known as the Gurgenidze system. Now, I don't really know which one I want to play. I know the Tartakower better, but the Gurgenidze is very, very interesting. I'll play the Gurgenidze. One of the things that I like about this system is that with like take and knight to f6, you can get yourself involved in some of the more obscure lines of the Caro with moves like knight to g5, or like bishop to d3, for example, is an interesting move that white can play. And you can get yourself kind of into some trouble. So I like the move g6 because even though the computer doesn't love this system, it's kind of like a hybrid of the Caro Kann defense and the modern defense being g6, bishop g7. And the only real way to punish the Gurgenidze is to play a quick e5 and try and block this bishop up. But a lot of people don't like to do that. My opponent goes bishop to d3. We're just going to go bishop to d7. If my opponent advances his pawn, okay, so be it. But for now, I think we'll just continue with bishop to g4. And essentially what the point of this system is we're trying to claim that the knight on c3 is misplaced. Because let's imagine white does something like castling here. Then we can go ahead and take on e4, opening up our bishop to the d4 pawn, and our queen is open to the d4 pawn, and we're pinning this knight to the queen, again removing defense of the d4 pawn. And basically white would love to play the move c3 to shore up his center, but the problem is his knight is on c3, and it's a very common idea to actually rotate the knight back towards the king side via somewhere like e2. I've actually had an over-the-board blitz game against a very strong player like 2200, who ended up playing the move knight to d1 because he was so frustrated with not being able to play the move c3. I then broke with c5 later on, but very interesting nonetheless. Now, the question is, can we go for this? After pawn takes, bishop takes makes no sense because we'll just go knight to f6. And the bishop will be kicked back and we'll just be up time. So here I assume knight takes. Now that does allow my opponent to go c3. So we would have to do something quickly to justify this. Here, we could win a pawn. But even then, just castles queenside from white, and I'm actually not too comfortable with that position, trading off both of our bishops and not getting a whole lot back for it other than one pawn. A pawn's a pawn, but like, don't overvalue one singular pawn. Another interesting move is e5, because if takes, we may have ideas of taking on f3 and playing d4 to fork the bishop and the knight. So that's another very interesting idea. If e5, though, my opponent, can he take here? Probably. But no, then we take on d4. And because the knight is pinned to the queen, that doesn't look good. e5 might actually be the move here. As crazy as it looks, like just to have a little pawn cube, and white's minor pieces look so good, but they might actually be vulnerable. So e5 here, take here, that wins a piece. Yes, because queenside castle, take, if the bishop goes to c4, then we have, no, we don't have queen to f6, but we have queen to e7. Yes, and that holds everything together, because the rook would open up, and we also need to defend f7. If e5 and my opponent takes here, then we take here. And the knight, of course, can't take because it's pinned to the queen. And that looks completely winning. So I'm going to go e5. I mean, it feels uncomfortable to be striking in the center this early, especially considering my king isn't castled yet, and neither of my knights are developed. But just through, you know, what I hope is concrete calculation, I think that we may just have a completely winning advantage very early on. And I mean, this position looks hilarious. It looks absolutely hilarious because the way that white is positioned his pieces, you would assume his center is perfect. Absolutely perfect. But maybe the move e5 exploits the fact that white hasn't played e5, which, like I said before, all the way back in this position is kind of the way that white wants to play it. You can throw in bishop d3 first, and after bishop to g7, again, e5 makes a lot of sense there. But maybe this is the issue with my opponent not playing e5 and also not taking, which is also a very common thing, which normally leads to very equalish positions. But of course, there's a lot of imbalance because of the pawn structure, my fianchettoed bishop, the fact that my light squared bishop will probably trade itself off on f3. It kind of goes out to g4 to die. But hopefully, we can prove that these pieces, as pretty as they look, are actually just weaknesses to the white position. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far and finding this useful, then please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Would really appreciate it. Really helps to motivate me keep making these daily uploads for you guys. I'm also considering working on a Caro Kann course at the moment, like a big one. So let me know what you think about the potential of that. Bishop e2. That is not a move I considered. Interesting, though. Interesting. So the queen now defends this, and the knight is now unpinned. That's very logical. Very logical. I get the feeling we should probably take. And after bishop takes, take here, opening up the queen with an attack on the bishop. And after, say, knight takes, then take on d4, winning a pawn. That looks like the logical thing to do. We could start with taking on e4. And after knight takes, taking on d4 makes no sense. We have to take the knight first, and I think that probably just transposes. Yes. Yeah, that would just transpose. However, does taking on here allow this? Is that a problem? Take, take, take. I don't think that changes anything. I don't think that changes anything. Let's just take here. And then we're going to take there. The point is we're just opening up our queen. And we're going to remove another defender of the squares. Did I just allow this? Oh, wait, did I just allow knight e4? I didn't even consider that. Oh, I probably should have taken the knight first. My opponent doesn't punish me, but I think I probably had to take the knight first. Because here, knight to e5 is probably a move. Fortunately, my opponent doesn't see that, and we can continue with our plan of taking on f3, removing the defender, or one of the defenders of the d4 pawn, and we're going to take on d4. And, I mean, it's the culmination of what I said several moves ago. I said that the whole point of this system is to try and exploit the d4 pawn, claim that the knight on c3 is misplaced, because if c3 was in this position, white would be absolutely fine, but he's too late. We can take on d4. And now we're up a pawn, and the game is certainly not over. The game is not over by a long shot. Bishop f4, for example, looks like a strong move, trying to play knight to d6 check. How exactly I'm going to stop that, I'm not entirely sure. That does look a little bit scary. Bishop here. Yeah, he goes for it. I actually don't know how I'm stopping that. Knight f6, knight d6, king f8, b7 hangs though. That's not amazing. Queen a5, queen d2. Well, that secures a queen trade. After takes, I suppose knight d6 isn't quite as big of a problem. If this... my idea is basically to make sure the queen defends e5, so I can go bishop to e5. I don't know if that really works, though, to be honest. Do I have to go bishop to f8? That's so ugly. I don't want to play that. I really don't want to play that. I mean, queen e7 is, of course, a move. Just putting pressure on the knight and pinning it to the king. If queen e7, I assume my opponent just castles, though. And I'm not really sure what I'm doing there. I mean, maybe I can go bishop to e5. But, I mean, rook e1, that looks pretty terrifying. There's all kinds of tactics of, like, takes, knight d6 check, winning my queen because it's pinned. Like, that's pretty brutal. Queen e7 castles, knight f6. That hangs this pawn, which I don't really want to do, considering how hard we just worked to win it. Maybe I have to go for this line. If queen takes d4, then I probably have moves like knight to d5 with like several attacks going on. That's probably fine. If here, castles. Yeah, that looks not great. Maybe I have to go knight to e7. And knight d6, king f8. If knight b6, queen b6. I don't know about that. Don't know. This is a little bit rough, to be fair. How are we going to get out of this situation? How are we going to get out of this? Queen e7 looks like it solves quite a few problems. But castles... Knight d7 trying to queenside castle. Knight d6, king f8, knight b7. Again, I don't really know what we're accomplishing there. Okay, let me give some more thought to queen a5 check. Let me give this some more thought, because this seemed a little bit more fruitful. Queen a5. If queen d2, then we trade queens, right? And then we should be okay. If queen a5, bishop d2, then we should also be okay. We can probably play a move like queen to f5, just controlling the f4 square. Actually, no, that would blunder knight to d6, so we still have to be careful. But let's say we play something like queen e5, trying to cover all the threats. It's a short-term solution, but it works, I think. Okay, so what about queen a5, king f1? Just shifting the king over, renewing all the threats in the position. Bishop to e5 was my idea. If knight d6 check takes, bishop takes. Then we probably go knight to d7. Queen e2 check. That's not amazing. I want to play queen a5 check. I am not at all confident in this move, but I don't really see another option. If we had one more move to castle, let's say our knight was already on e8 and we could castle quickly, then we'd be fine in this position. The problem is this is an imminent threat and it's very difficult to address. Very difficult to address because, I mean, whilst we've won a pawn, yes, we've also launched our D and E pawns up the board very quickly without backing from the knights. And there's a reason that knights normally get developed first because, you know, then you can get yourself castled quickly and your knights control important squares. I mean, if our knight was on f6, there would be no problems with the knight on e4 because we could just trade it off. We don't have that luxury because I was too busy pushing pawns and developing my bishops. Now, we may still be fine. I may have just misplayed something in the whole encounter in the center of the board. Maybe I had to be a bit more patient here and start with something like knight e7 or even knight d7. I'm not sure. Maybe e5 was a bit premature and I had to play something like knight d7. But bishop d2, yeah, so I was hoping my opponent would do something like this, because king f1 I think is probably the best move, but it's also a difficult move to play. Now after queen e5, we seem to cover a lot of the threats. If my opponent castles knight e7, rook e1 castles, the knight has no useful discoveries, and I think we survive there. I think we get away with it. And of course, we are currently threatening the move f5, potentially, to win the knight, because it will be pinned to the king. So I assume my opponent has to castle here. And there is something to be said for something like knight d7 and queenside castle. You could definitely argue that's a good idea, but I would like to just block the e-file up as soon as possible and get myself castled as soon as possible. Also, if I castle to the king side, this bishop is protected. And also, again, I'm up a pawn. I don't need to be dealing with opposite side castling issues. That seems unnecessary. So let's go knight e7. I don't think I'm missing anything here. Rook e1 castles. The knight has no useful squares because our queen covers all the squares the knight could try and use. Now, I suppose if castles knight g5, I can't take it because it's covered by the bishop, but I just play a move like queen d6 and I'm okay. And of course, knight to f6 check, I can just take it. Now, I do need to be aware of the move bishop to g5, because that does actually threaten knight to f6 check, because if my queen takes, the bishop takes, my bishop takes, and it's 2 pieces for a queen. So maybe that's an issue. Bishop g5? Oh, that's another interesting move. Bishop to b4, putting pressure on my knight. I can't play the move c5 to block the bishop off, which I'd love to play. I don't really want to have to give up the rook. A move like a5 doesn't feel like it works here. I mean, if nothing else, the bishop just drops back to a3 and I still have all the same problems. So rook e8 is the move I want to play. That's the move I want to play. And I think it works, to be honest, because if knight comes here, for example, I just go queen c7 and I'm good. I'm good. If rook e8, knight d6, which looks a little bit more scary. Also stops queen b5. Oh, that attacks my rook and my pawn and my queen. Ah, that's a bit of an issue. That is a bit of an issue. Do I have to sack a pawn and go knight c6? I don't want to do that. Maybe I have to? Go like this, so that my knight is defended and my queen puts pressure on the bishop, so knight d6 is met with queen takes c5. Let me think a second. I know I don't have much time here, but knight here, queen f6, knight b7. I don't think it quite works. Maybe knight d7, knight d6, queen g5, knight b7, c5. I'm trying to make some very complicated stuff work here. c5, because my queen maintains defense of this square, kicking the bishop back. I want to go rook b8, but the bishop defends the knight, so that doesn't work. I think I have to go c5. I don't see a better option. And I mean, the knight can take it. Oh no, this is lost. The knight can just take. What am I doing? And then I lose this. Absolutely idiotic move. I mean, I don't know if I had anything to defend myself, to be fair. This looks like a horrific position. But I could have been a lot more stubborn than that. I could have been much more stubborn. This is not good. Really not good. Okay, let's go queen to g5. I'm trying to create counterplay. I have vague ideas of knight f5, knight to h4. The bishop takes as expected. I think probably knight to c6. Defending my rook with the other rook. Opening up an attack on the bishop. Defending my knight. Also blocking the bishop's retreat, which could allow me to generate some counterplay in the future. Really, really poor, though. I could also rotate this knight via d5, potentially, into the f4 square, rather than h4. And then maybe I have tactics like this in the future. Again, it's a little bit vague, I am aware. I probably am completely losing here. But I've still got to try my best to bring this back, because you know, you are going to mess up when you play chess. That's just inevitable. You're going to make bad moves. You're going to make bad decisions. My whole opening idea might not even work. Maybe white has too much counterplay and I was overextending my position. I don't know. We'll find out in the computer analysis, but we need to try and bring this back. Why is my opponent just hung a knight? What? What? Okay. Thank you. I mean, I know your bishop was under attack, but I mean, there's a rook hanging. You could at least take the rook. And now we're just completely... Well, we should be completely winning. Queen f3 might be played, applying pressure to my rook. But we just move the rook, I assume. Now we have two knights for a piece. Sorry, two knights for a rook. My opponent is up a pawn, so he has a rook and a pawn for two knights. But that is not a good trade for him. Not a good trade. Because, I mean, once my knights really start to activate and get themselves into the position, they should be pretty powerful. They should be pretty powerful. Especially, yeah, no, that's a bit slow. I mean, I assume the idea is to go bishop to b4, but again, that's a slow idea. Also, bear in mind, this is a very real diagonal that could cause white problems. I think rook b8 is the move I want to start with. Just applying pressure to b2. Also getting off this diagonal, because queen f3 looks like a natural move. My rook is quite exploitable on the a8 square. I know my opponent can play bishop to f4 to go after the rook on b8, but if he does that immediately, I'll take on b4. My opponent goes b4, which makes sense, trying to counterattack. I assume bishop d6. Sorry, queen d6. Queen d5 also looks good. I think I prefer this. Yeah, I do. This just looks like a more active diagonal to be on, controlling these two diagonals rather than these two. And also, access to the 5th rank looks useful. Yeah, okay, my opponent develops his bishop. Rook c8 looks good, targeting c2, which could be weak. Also, now d3 is opening up my bishop's attack to the rook. For the time being, we need to be careful about doing anything like that, because if our knight has to take on b8, then our other knight will hang. And rook e8 just pins the knight to the rook, so that would be a bit of a silly move, I think. Rook c8 looks decent. Rook d8 also looks decent, though. I prefer rook c8 just because it's on a light square. The rook on d8 looks good, trying to support a d6 push. However, my rook on c8 is not vulnerable to bishop to c7 ideas, for example, or bishop to g5 ideas. So if bishop g5 here, I probably just go knight to f5, and my knight's quite a good piece. My opponent could play a move like g4, but then we just drop the knight to d6, and that's a very overextended pawn. I can probably take advantage of this diagonal in the future. So that would be pretty nice. Now, yeah, I don't understand my opponent just hanging a piece like that. That was pretty nuts. That was pretty nuts. And he gave us a way back into the game where, to be honest, I didn't really deserve it. I did not really deserve that at all. So, very lucky. I am aware of the move b5, by the way, trying to dislodge my knight from the defense of e7, which is another reason I put my queen on d5 rather than d6, so that I can move the rook away from the b file, because my queen is covering the b5 square. Let's imagine I move my queen to d6 before. Oh, that's an interesting move, targeting this. I assume just knight to f5, though. Yeah, that looks fine, right? Just disconnecting this, and there's no way to kick my knight out because you can't play g4 because your queen is on g4, which is important. And now d3 is a very real threat. I didn't want to play it here because this felt a little bit flimsy. All of these pieces defending each other like this, it feels very flimsy. The knight on f5, you could consider it to be flimsy. I don't, however, because this knight is very difficult for white to do anything about. Okay, how do we continue this position? I think we've consolidated a lot of our pieces. What's next? The move h5 looks like a very good improving move, and I think I'm going to play it. The reason is, again, g4 is the only way to kick this knight out. If my knight gets to h4, I could be causing some problems on the light squares. So h5 not only attacks the queen, so it comes with tempo, but also prevents g4 in the future, because I will just take it very happily. Also gives my king an escape square on h7 if I need it, which could be useful. Because if the back rank gets exposed and I have to go bishop to f8, then bishop to h6 ideas could be a problem in the future. Of course, my knight covers that square for now, but in the future. Queen g5. Okay. Is that queen almost trapped? It almost is. f6 almost traps the queen, except g6 will hang. Which does make me tempted to play king to h7, because then f6 would trap the queen. Now, if king h7 is g4 an idea? Can I not just go f6 anyway? Yeah, I can. That's an interesting idea. I think I'm going to play it. I think the king is good on h7 regardless. I think it is a minor improvement to the king's position. My opponent may actually get tempted by the move c3 here, trying to play on the fact that the pawn is pinned to my queen. But king to h7 is quite a sinister move, because assuming I'm playing king h7 to guard the g6 pawn, that's kind of difficult to see. And the queen doesn't really look like she has any escape squares. I don't know if white can really do anything about this. Maybe bishop g3, giving the queen an escape this way. But bishop g3, I don't have bishop h6, because that would allow queen to f6. But, I mean, trades probably favour me anyway, for a start. Although, no, that would actually hang my queen. So let's not do that. My opponent goes c4. I assume I can just take the pawn, though. I don't really see a problem with that. Yeah, let's just take it. I don't want to allow the move b5. Like, I'm considering queen d7 in that position, but then, because there's a pawn on c4, b5 can be played, and my knight gets kicked, and my knight is happy on c6, right? So I don't really want to allow that. And it's just a free pawn at the end of the day. And now this is a passed pawn. I suppose my queen guards f7, which could be useful. Yeah, okay, rook c1, we just go back, right? If this, then this. Probably. Queen d3 doesn't really do anything. Queen a6 looks a little bit silly. Here, no. Here. here. My knight's fine because my queen is defending it. So let's go for that. I'm literally just going to duck out of the position and go, thank you for the c-pawn, your queen is still trapped. I don't think my opponent realizes the danger his queen is in. Also, I just realized, maybe I can take the rook and go f6. Can I just take the rook? Yeah, I can. Right? Because you have to take back, that's forced. So let's forget about that. f6 traps the queen, right? There's no way out. There's no way out for the queen. Yeah, just queen c5. I was saying before, I probably could have just taken on c1, but actually the bishop can take back, which gives the queen an escape to d2. But now the queen is fully stuck because the bishop is still on f4. So we get a little queen sacrifice this game. I mean, it's not that impressive because the follow-up is quite obvious. But yeah, the queen completely trapped. Sorry if that messed with the audio. My apologies. I am a thirsty boy. And I mean, of course, if something like takes, we have 2 pieces for a rook. Also, we're covering the infiltration square on e7, which is quite useful. And the biggest problem for white is that this is a passed pawn, and it's very difficult for him to stop it. Now, I suppose you could argue after queen takes f5, g takes f5, my bishop is hemmed in. That's true. I can always just rotate to f8, though, and put pressure on c5, or go to h6 and offer a bishop trade. So, it's fine. The pawn structure's messed up. Oh, no, sorry, I'm just up a piece there. No, I'm up a piece in that endgame. My bad. Not 2 pieces for a rook. It's just up a knight. And I think the pawns are equal. Yeah, same amount of pawns. Of course, my structure will be messed up if I have to take like this. But I'm up a piece. And I have a passed pawn. And white also has a passed pawn, but it's not going anywhere because there's a rook aligned with it and a knight blockading it. This pawn is a lot scarier because if I put a rook on d8, it's not quite as easy to stop it. And also bishop h6 can help support it. And knight e5 can support it. And knight e5 c4 can support it. And also attack the other pawn. My opponent takes. It, yeah, is the only try, really. And I think it is quite useful that the rook can't infiltrate here. If the rook goes to e6, I mean, it's an active rook, I suppose. But I probably have knight to e5, opening my rook up to this. Okay, yeah, he plays rook to d1, which is passive, but he doesn't really have too many options. In fairness, bishop h6 is very tempting. Rook e8 is also tempting. Also rook d8. Literally just trying to push. Maybe rook d8, rook d5. I like that. Do I have to be concerned about his rook? I don't think so. Yeah, okay, bishop d6, sure. But now bishop f8. And we challenge my opponent's bishop. And of course, if the bishop moves, we just take the pawn. You can go bishop to c7, but I'll just go rook to d7, counter-attacking, and you're still going to lose the pawn because you have no bishop to b6 because I control that square. And my knight is a really, really useful piece here for eliminating counterplay because, like I said before, it's blockading the c-pawn, but it's also defending my d-pawn. And this is why knights are typically considered in chess to be the best blockaders, like blockaders of pawns, because they can sit on their blockading square and also exert influence on so many other squares on the board. Even though they're performing defensive duties, they can still do a lot because they can jump. Other pieces don't have that luxury. If I had a rook there, for example, sure, it would attack c5, but it would have limited capabilities compared to what it normally has. Whereas the knight has all the same capabilities. I assume I just go d3 here. d3, rook back. Rook d5. My opponent just offered me a draw. Yeah, I'm sorry, Pro, but I'm not taking a draw here. I'm actually going to start with Rook d5. I think that's a bit more accurate. Maybe I'm allowing the king in, but then knight e5, king here, here, here. Maybe that's not the best. Maybe I shouldn't have let the king in. My idea was to switch the move order. That's my point. I'm trying to switch the move order around. That's a good move, taking away this square from my knight. That is a good move. Let's push. And I think I have an idea. We are just going to bring the king over. My opponent brings his king. Can we give this check? If my computer lets me draw the arrow, please. Can I give this check? If the king moves... It feels very unnecessary. Let's bring the king. And hopefully my idea will be shown in a second. I'm waiting for king to e3, yes. Then I'm going to go pawn to d2. And what I'm doing is I'm offering my opponent a trade of rooks. But the problem is, because I forced his king so far back, he now cannot defend the c5 pawn, which was basically his last chance. So I'm going to pick this pawn up, and I'm just going to be up a knight. I'm going to be up a clean knight, and with the rooks off the board, there's no winning chance. Sorry, no drawing chances for my opponent. You can try and come here, but it doesn't really do anything. Eventually, white is going to run out of moves. I guess I have to be careful about stalemates, though. Although... Wait, no, that would be genius. That would be kind of genius to do this. For me. Because his king wouldn't be able to move. It is risky. It is risky. Basically, my idea is that the king can't move, so he has to start moving his kingside pawns, and I will win at least a pawn and get a passed pawn from that. I think that actually works. Because these are both frozen now because of my knight. And the king can't go here because of his own pawn. And so he either has to go g4 and lose a pawn, or go h3. And I can do basically nothing. Just go here. a6. Again, he has to move a pawn. If he goes g4, then take, take, take. I've got a passed pawn. And I've basically got two moves in reserve with a6 and a5. My opponent doesn't, because after h4, a5, he has to go g4. I importantly take with the f pawn, giving him the move f5, because I don't want to stalemate him. And then I move my king to c5. Then I go, after this, king c5. And then I give the king a way out. I give the king a way out, and it is no longer stalemate now, of course, and then we just promote the pawn. That's some cool endgame technique, if I've ever seen it. And that was not a perfect game by any means. I think that my opponent probably... He certainly had a winning position from the opening, like going into the middle game, and just kind of gave it away out of panic or something, I don't know. But we'll find out where I went wrong with that, because it felt like the opening went perfectly, and then it didn't. I might have rushed my aggression in the center, but we'll see. Let's get into the game analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, so we did get a brilliant move, which I assume is the queen sacrifice. But yeah, we definitely gave the game away to white at some point in the opening. So let's see. Let's see. So e4, c6. d4, d5, knight c3. I have many videos in my Caro Kann playlist, which will be linked below, as well as the previous episodes of the speedrun, which will also be linked below, where we go for this line, known as the Tartakower. And this has a reputation for being very drawish. It doesn't necessarily have to be drawish. It depends how you play it, really. I personally like the line here with bishop to f5, which means that bishop d3, I can just trade the bishops off quickly, because this white bishop can be very powerful. And the Tartakower is perfectly fine, but I go for the Gurgenidze. And e5 is the way to try and punish this. And then black just continues developing. A move like knight f3 tends to be met with bishop g4. And you can see quickly white can lose his advantage anyway if he doesn't play accurately. But this is a very strange system, so not many people know it. My opponent goes bishop d3. The computer wants to take on e4. Can you snatch this? This feels very dubious. Bishop d2 is the move. What? Well, knight f3 looks far more natural. Queen d8, castles, bishop g7. Taking a pawn there, I don't know. It's kind of what we did in the game, and it got us into a bit of trouble. I went bishop g7. And again, the computer wants e5, but my opponent goes knight to f3. We go bishop g4, which is kind of always how you meet knight to f3, because you're putting so many pawns on light squares. Normally, this pawn ends up on e6 as well. So you get the bishop out ASAP, and if it's met with h3, you just take. And you can see already, the computer thinks that my position is better, mainly because d4 is a problem, but let's say d4 was defended even. Let's go for something like this. This is still a perfectly reasonable position for black, and this is what the Gurgenidze will get you a lot of the time. So, h3. No, sorry. Bishop to e3. Why is my game doing this? Bishop e3. Okay, so e5 is the best move. Yeah, it's by far the best move. And my opponent finds the only move, which is bishop e2. And fair play, because I did not even consider that. Not even consider it. What's the point of e5? Well, if ed5, then ed4. And the knight can't take because of this, and if the bishop takes, we just take. Because you're forked. If this, then we go d4. And we shove the pawn forwards. And if knight takes, you lose your queen. And if bishop takes, then bishop f3, queen d4. And we are up a piece for 2 pawns. So you can't take either of the pawns. If you do something like castles, then I'll just take on d4. And if bishop d4, then bishop d4, and you can't take back because I'm pinning your knight. So my opponent goes bishop e2. And that opens up the queen's defense of d4. And also means that the knight is not pinned to the queen. A very good find. Here I played de4, but I correctly realized afterwards that knight e5 is a problem. Because the knight is no longer pinned. So what I needed to do is start with this, and after bishop to f3, not de4 and then ed4, but c5. What a move, c5. If you take, then d4. If you take, then d4. And if you take, then cd4. You're getting forked no matter what if you take. So you either have to take with the knight and allow cd4, bishop d2, knight f6. And this is just an interesting game. Or you have to drop the bishop back, give up this pawn, and then take on d5. So the position transposes. However, I mixed up the move order, but my opponent didn't punish me. He went knight takes e4, bishop f3, bishop f3. Here I went ed4, and after bishop to f4, I played queen a5 check. And bishop d2 is a miss, which I kind of thought it was. I was far more concerned about a move like king to f1. Now the computer wants b4, which is a wild move. And after this, c3. And it basically just wants to pose threats to my queen, so that I have to respond to the threats, and then castle? And I guess my king is just really open? Okay, I mean, interesting. The way to defend this, kind of, is knight d7, which I considered. But after knight d6 check, king f8, knight b7, I couldn't figure out what to do. I mean, I saw the move queen b6, knight goes back to d6. And here I have to find bishop e5. Again, I did consider these bishop to e5 ideas, mainly in tangent with queen to a5. But Oh, I suppose you give your king the g7 square as well. That makes sense. But I didn't consider it in this context. I mean, if this exchange happens, black is apparently better. But again, this is a very hard position to evaluate. My opponent goes bishop d2, though, fortunately for me. On king f1, I'm not sure what I would have done. Probably knight e7 and gone for this. This isn't perfect, but I thought, well, I do have these kinds of threats if you take on b7. I did see the king was potentially vulnerable on f1. But bishop d2 from my opponent, which was great. Now, queen e5 is a miss. Queen c7 is the best. And this does the same things, except doesn't put the queen in the line of fire, which I just completely missed for some reason. That's my bad. I went queen e5. And the problem is, after knight e7, rook e1, which is the only way to punish it, I've got some problems. Now, castling is the best move. Bishop g5 is the best move from white, which I thought that white should play. Because then knight f6 check actually comes with a threat. Because if you do it now, I just take it. Right? Whereas if this and I try to develop normally and then this, then when I take, it's two pieces for a queen. But bishop b4, there is only one move to defend here for black, and I did not find it, and it was queen to c7. Why did I reject this move? I couldn't tell you. Clearly, I had a blind spot on queen c7, because that was the correct answer twice now. I went c5, and c5 makes sense because my plan was bishop c5, knight bc6, and the computer thinks that this is potentially holdable. I'm just trying to hold everything together, just about, right? And if the knight moves, the bishop will hang. That's the idea. But I completely missed knight c5. I just completely missed this move for whatever reason. So queen g5, not the best move, but I'm trying to remain active and control this and control this. Bishop b7, knight bc6. And the bishop is hanging, but I thought my opponent might do this, and after knight to c6, something like this is a bit of a problem. You can argue it's kind of complicated in fairness. I also thought my opponent could just do this. And, I mean, if I take back, then you just save the bishop, and I will try and fight with these kinds of ideas maybe, and maybe rotating this knight in, potentially rook c8. I will fight, but I'm lost. But bishop d2 was completely baffling. White has to prioritize he has to prioritize winning material right now. Because I'm attacking this and I'm attacking this, but white's also attacking stuff. He can also move the knight with an attack on my queen if he really needs to. I mean, he can do it now if he wants, right? And after I move my queen, you can take, just take stuff. Typically, that's the answer to a lot of these kinds of positions where lots of things are hanging. Normally, you have to find the right sequence in which to just take everything in a way that benefits you. Retreating like this normally doesn't work. It's like backing out from the fight. It's like if you play football. I don't know how many of you play football, or even rugby, and you're going for a tackle. The player that dangles a leg in and kind of half goes in for the tackle, they normally come out worse. The person who just goes for it straight in and just uses all their power, they normally come off better. And that's kind of what happens here. So queen c5, bishop a8, rook a8. The game is not over. I have two pieces for a rook and a pawn, which should be winning, but we have to prove it. a3 I thought was very slow. Very slow move, but okay. Rook b8. Get my rook off of this. I thought that queen f3 made a lot of sense here. Computer doesn't love it, but I thought, well, it applies good pressure. The queen is nice on f3. It hangs the c2 pawn, but then there's issues like this, which is the kind of pressure I'm alluding to. a3. I go rook b8, b4. Queen d5 is a mistake. For some reason. I don't really know why. It wants queen f5. Why? Maybe he wants the knight to go to d5 and then c3. Maybe that's the idea. No clue. No clue. But, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this move. Bishop f4. We go rook c8, which is the best move. Just rerouting our rook to a safe square. Queen g4. Knight f5. Rook ad1, which makes a lot of sense. And then we go h5, which I thought was a really clever move, because if the queen retreats, then, I mean, this is exactly what we want. The computer wants to go knight d8 into e6, which is a very nice idea, but I don't think I'm quite as sophisticated as to allow this. That feels very unnecessary. So I wouldn't have gone knight to d8. There's no way. No way I would have played that. I mean, I suppose the point is I can't go rook to e8. Maybe knight c to e7 makes sense. I don't know. This seems a bit more resilient from white, in my opinion. But queen g5. And for some unknown reason, I didn't consider this. Which, the queen gets an escape square, but I just win a bishop. And for some reason, I didn't play that because I was fixated on winning the queen. And I went for this. c4. Queen c4, rook c1. And here, taking doesn't work. If rook takes, then I have f6. And after take, this doesn't work because I have this defending the rook. But you can take with the bishop. And then after this, you go queen to d2 or queen to f4, and you're safe. However, after c4, queen takes, rook c1, queen d5, rook c5, now the best move is to take. Queen c5, brilliant move. I don't know if it's really a brilliant move. It seems quite self-explanatory. But it's essentially just a queen trade, and I win an exchange. And in return, my pawn structure is a bit damaged. But it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, this endgame is completely winning. And maybe this wasn't the cleanest conversion ever. I personally thought it was quite nice, though. Because I get a rook trade, I force the king back, my knight just sits on c6 because it's blockading the pawn, waiting for my king to get over here. And then, yeah, king c4 is by far the best move, and I was very, very happy to find this. It's a bit nerve-wracking to set up, like, a potential stalemate like this, because you, of course, don't want to stalemate your opponent in a completely winning position. But there's only so much white can do. He's going to either have to go g4 and allow me to win, hg4 here, and then I can move my king, let the king out, and push the pawn. Or he can do what he did in the game with h4, then we go a5, and then g4 is the only move on the board. fg4, f5 is the only move on the board. We then move the king, let his king out, and run our pawn down the board and promote. White could have been more resilient, sure, but the game was lost once the rooks came off the board. So, yeah, I'm very... I don't know if I'd say happy with that game, but I think it provided a lot of educational value. That's for sure. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you want to see another really cool Caro Kann game, then check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.